Hello, friends. Welcome to this week's episode of the Remarkable People podcast. Today, we're going to talk about anger, anxiety, and stress and how to process, how to hopefully get to the point while we're experiencing the trigger emotion, we will be able to calm ourselves down and really reframe what's happening. He's going to teach us 6 key words that we can use to really start the paradigm shift and to become calmer, less angry. We talk about how the Bible says, be ye angry and sin not. Anger is a healthy emotion when used the right way, but when we carry it with us, it can kill us. So right now, we're going to meet with a man who's wrote 23 plus books on the topic. He speaks to everybody from Fortune 100 organizations to the FBI about anxiety and stress. And he has his own practice helping people deal with it. His background, he's an MD in internal medicine, but now he devotes his time to a healthy mindset in dealing with anger. So at this time, get ready for a remarkable episode with our friend, Dr. Mort Orman.
Warning: the interview you're about to experience has already positively changed people's lives. If applied appropriately, it can change yours too. The views expressed are those of the guest and host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal, financial, or medical advice. Warning: this episode may contain graphic details of the guest's life. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey, Dr. Mort, how are you today?
I am fine, David. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I just told our community around the world a little bit about you and what to expect in this episode. But straight out of your mouth, if people commit to spending a half an hour, hour and a half, whatever it is today with us, what do you guarantee them that they can walk away from your life and learn to apply to theirs and have a better existence?
Well, they'll definitely get a whole new way of thinking about anger as a very common emotion we all experience. And they will actually they'll walk away with X-ray vision into what's causing anger to occur in their brain. Things we can't normally see, but when you know what they are, then you're able to understand what your brain is doing. And it's literally like having X-ray vision, like Superman, like X-ray vision. So I'll give them a very simple model for understanding how their brain creates anger. And that's something they'll be able to use for the rest of their lives. I've been using it for the last 40 years. Every time I get angry or I work with people who have anger, and it works every time. It's a great, simple system for understanding how your brain creates anger.
Awesome. I'm personally super excited because this is an area I struggle with. Those core emotions, and my default emotion is either like sadness or rage. So it'll be cool to be able to maybe unlock part of me, and our listeners around the world can do the same. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back with Dr. Mort after this very short 30 to 60-second affiliate commercial. And then we're going to understand ourselves better, anger better, and how to use it to turn it on and off, I assume, right, Dr. Mort, as we need.
Absolutely.
And be better people. So that's it. We'll be right back in 30 to 60 seconds.
I hear every day about the products you all wish MyPillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard MyPillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
Shop MyPillow.com using promo code REMARKABLE to support this podcast and get up to 80% off your order. Or call 1-800-644-6612 by phone. That's 800-644-6612.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So, Dr. Mort, I'm pumped. Our listeners are pumped. you have an expertise on the brain and anger and understanding it. But let's talk about first, how did you get to this point? Tell us a little bit about your life. Where were you born? What was your upbringing life? What were the things that made you the man you are today?
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, back in 1948, actually. So I'm 77 years old now. So I was raised in Baltimore most of my life. A very nice family, very nice neighborhood. Didn't have a lot of anger in our family or a lot of stress in our family. But when I became a teenager and went to college, I started getting angry at myself. I started getting angry at other people. And then I went to medical school, and I get angry at myself a lot when I wouldn't live up to the high standards that I set for myself. And so I had a lot of anger as a young man in my 20s and 30s. And when I opened my practice, I would get angry at my patients from time to time. I was successful professionally, but in my personal life, I didn't feel very successful because I couldn't control my emotions. I had a lot of anger problems, anxiety problems, relationship failures, one after another. So I was doing fine professionally, but if and usually you don't show that to other people. But inside, I knew that I was struggling with a lot of emotional difficulties that I just couldn't figure out how to solve. It was very frustrating because I usually was good at solving any problem that was bothering me. And of course, when you become a doctor, you help other people solve their problems that are pretty significant. So I was a problem solver, but I couldn't solve these problems. That was very frustrating and demoralizing to be in that situation.
Yeah, and that is frustrating because a lot of people who are wired like you are to solve problems by nature, and then whether they're an engineer, whether they're a physician, or whether they're even a janitor, if your mind's wired to solve problems, you can't. You can get stuck in a loop of just exhaustion where you're just trying to solve it, even in your sleep, and you can't. So is
Yeah,
that
and
what you
I
found?
tried all the standard anger management stuff and stress management stuff, and all the things that I knew about through my medical training, or had heard about or read about, and none of them really hit the spot. None of them really. I mean, they might help a little bit here and there, but every day I'd wake up, I'd be the same angry guy. It never stopped me from being angry. You know, which is kind of funny because I was born on Groundhog's Day, February 2nd.
Bill
And
Murray.
that was literally my experience of living life. It's every day I'd wake up and it would be another day where I would get angry over little things, and no matter what I did, I just couldn't stop it. And actually, if you'd have walked up to me back then in my like mid 20s, I mean in my 20s or early 30s, and if you said to me, "Do you ever see a day where you might not be an angry guy?" And I would have told you, "No, I don't think. I think that's not in the cards for me. I just think it's part of my personality, part of my DNA. I don't know what it is, but I've tried everything, nothing worked. And, as far as I'm concerned, it's going to always be this way. I just have to put up with it as best I can, deal with it as best I can." And that's what I truly believed at that time. And I was really shocked that, a year or two later, I had completely gone to the other side and had very little anger in my life. And I've had very little anger in the last 40 years because I finally figured out what the hell was going on that I didn't understand in those earlier years.
Beautiful. And you said your family you came from, because a lot of times we have learned behavior and you come from an angry home. That's just, our model. You said
Yeah.
your home did not have that kind of default anger, or was it just more passive aggressive or
No, my parents were not angry people in general, and they sort of had a rule that if they ever got angry at each other, they wouldn't show it in front of the kids, me and my sister. So they would work it out on their own, and so I never was around a lot of anger, but I developed it, kind of like based on my own frustrations with myself, and some things that I was trying to achieve, and I would fall short, and then I'd get angry at myself. So I had kind of self-imposed anger. It wasn't really coming from other people that was modeling.
okay, so you got the first 30 years of your life roughly.
Yes.
Before we get to the point where you cracked the code and figured out what's going on,
Yep.
is there anything else in your life that we need to talk about that'll set the stage for the solution? Did you get married? Did you have a bunch of failed relationships? Did you have, conflict within your practice more outside the ordinary than
Yeah, I mean,
than
I had all that. As I mentioned, I had one failed relationship after another. A lot of that had to do with not knowing how to deal with anger. So the anger would come up frequently in the relationships and eventually cause them to end. One thing that really is significant is growing up in Baltimore, like I did as a kid. My father and I were big sports fans. Growing up as a little boy, and particularly my father had season tickets for the Baltimore Colts, which was our professional football team. And my childhood hero growing up was Johnny Unitas, who was the quarterback of the Colts. And I realized later on in life, I realized how watching him play football and the attitude that he had, he was like Tom Brady before Tom Brady emerged on the scene. He had this incredible winning attitude. And, you just knew that no matter what the score was, no matter how far behind the team was, Johnny Unitas was going to find a way to win. So he just had this winner's attitude that seeped into me. And I'm sure, it affected lots of other of his fans and other kids in Baltimore who got to see him play regularly. But I know for me, it made a huge difference in my life because I had this positive winning attitude that no matter what obstacles I faced, eventually I was going to figure out, how to win. And that's kind of what led me to have the breakthrough that I had around anger, because many people would have given up after trying all the things that I tried and failing, but I just had this sort of Johnny Unitas attitude that, I'll eventually stay in the game, you'll eventually figure it out. And that kept me going and actually got me to go into personal development work, which is where I eventually, learned what I needed to learn to figure out what was going on. So I really attribute a lot of my success, including becoming a physician and being successful as a physician and everything else in my life, to that exposure I had as a kid to this one guy who was just exuded winning attitude, and you just couldn't help but be influenced by him.
Yeah, and then let's talk about that then, because in my mind, I'm not an expert, but I'm a human, right? We all have the same emotions, just different ways we process it. You have a
Mm-hmm.
healthy anger that comes up when you need it.
Mm-hmm.
Even the Bible says, be ye angry and sin not. There's nothing wrong with being angry.
Yeah.
It's just doing the wrong thing with it. Then there's the people who have learned behavior where they saw their parents always angry. So they thought, okay, my reaction to my kid disobeying is to be strong or to be just drop the hammer, when
Yep.
really that's not the way to handle it, let's say all the time, but that's what you learned. Then there's
Yes.
people that walk around, it just seems from birth, like you said, you're just angry. You just thought you were born that way. But what you're saying is, despite how we got there, or some people, another one is you're traumatized. You have serious harm done to you.
And
And
there's
then
a lot of
you,
people in that category. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then you walk around angry, and it carries over into multiple aspects of your life, not just the one it happened in, but you're exhausted, you're tired, you don't want to be this way, but you are, and you don't know how to get out. So what you're telling me is you can help all of us in all of these situations to be free?
Yeah. And I, like you say, I make a distinction between unwanted anger and wanted anger, anger that's beneficial in some way. And there are a lot of people where anger can be very beneficial in their lives. But most of the time, I would say 80% of the anger that we experience as human beings is in the category of unwanted, potentially harmful, damaging anger we'd rather not have, we'd rather be free of. And most people don't know how to get free of that. And I didn't know how to do it, despite all my education. I was one of the most educated people on the planet, and going through 7 years of medical training and also dabbling in psychology. And I still didn't understand my anger and my other emotions so that I could get my hands on the controls and turn it on and off whenever I wanted to. And if it was serving me, then I wouldn't do that. But if it was causing problems or ruining a relationship or affecting my health, which fortunately I was young enough that I hadn't done that yet, I would know how to turn it off, or I would know how to understand how my brain was causing it to happen, which is invisible. Most people, you can't see it. So unless someone informs you or you learn about it, you're kind of in the dark. And that's where most people are today. They want to do something about their anger, but they're completely in the dark about where it's actually coming from.
Well, then let's talk about it. We're here together.
Hmm.
We have unresolved issues that we want to get rid of, but we don't know how. Where does it start?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is how our brains work. And one of the primary things our brains are doing all the time, our brains learned that they had to simplify things for us. There's so much data coming into our nervous system, into our sense organs. It's just too much. for the brain to process. So the brain had to sort of chunk things down, just determine what was important and not important. And so our brains are always filtering everything before we experience it, before we perceive anything. It's being filtered by our brains. So our brains have thousands and thousands of different filters. So, for example, if you were bit by a dog when you were 3 years old, you're going to probably have a dogs are dangerous filter. And every time a dog comes into your vicinity, it's going to trigger some anxiety or a fear reaction because your brain is filtering that reality into your past experience of a negative experience with a dog. Whereas if a person didn't have that experience, a dog comes up to them, they might reach out and pet it and say, "Oh, what a wonderful little creature." They won't have that same filter. So that's just an example of our brains constantly filtering things, and it happens all the time, every day, 24/7. So that's what our brains do. They chunk down the amount of data that's coming in. Our brains decide through various mechanisms what's important for us to attend to. So, for example, if you set a goal for yourself to achieve something, your brain's going to start filtering the world, that lines up with things that might help you do that or keep you from doing that. You'll start seeing things differently. It's the old adage, you buy a red car and all of a sudden you start seeing red cars all over the place. They were there. Your brain had just filtered them out, and now you have one. So you're more aware of it. You're more tuned to it. So now your brain's going to let that appear to you. So that's what our brains are doing all the time. And most of our emotions come from a set of 3 or 4 very simple filters or ways that our brain tells us to look at a situation. And if we look at it that way, then we're going to get the emotion that goes with that. So it's not just anger that has this property, but anxiety, sadness, guilt, frustration. They all have their own little formulas for how our brain is filtering and presenting the world to us that makes us have those emotions. So for anger, there's 3, and they're not very hard, to understand. So for example, the first filter when we get angry is that we're looking at the world and we see things in terms of somebody did something bad or wrong that they shouldn't have done. So no, we don't get angry if we think somebody did something wonderful or terrific or fantastic. It's usually some negative view of somebody doing something wrong or unjust or unconscionable or unfair or harmful in some way. Okay. And then the second filter is somebody was hurt or harmed or negatively impacted by that bad and wrong behavior. It could be us, it could be somebody we care about, it could be the planet, it could be anything, that was a negative impact. And then the third filter is one I call unilateral blame. So it's a very limited, narrow, reduced view of blame where we only look at the behavior of the person who did the bad, wrong thing. And we don't see any other causes that might have been involved. So it's like we have horse blinders on and we're only focused on that person. And we don't see any other causes that may have been real and have occurred, but our brain's going to filter them out. So when you get those 3 filters, and people should write these down, by the way, and put it on a little sticky note or an index card or something, because this is what will give you X-ray vision into where your anger is coming from. So somebody did something bad and wrong they shouldn't have done. Somebody was hurt, harmed, or negatively impacted, and the person who did the bad and wrong thing was unilaterally responsible or to blame. When you see the world through those 3 filters and you believe that they're true, the natural response is to have the emotion of anger. Now, again, if let's say you had anxiety, your brain's telling you to look through different filters to produce the emotion of anxiety. Same with sadness. Different filters produce sadness. So when we're talking about anger here, it's useful to know those 3 filters because every time you get angry, it doesn't matter. There could be 1,000 different things that trigger different individuals. Some might be triggered get angry by certain external events and some might not. It doesn't matter what the external event is, the internal process is always the same 3 filters for all of us, for you, for me, people that got angry 1,000 years ago, people that are going to get angry 1,000 years from now. It's always because the brain is presenting these 3 filters and telling you that this is what's true about whatever happened. And as long as you buy that and accept it and look at it that way, you will have the emotion of anger.
So now we acknowledge, okay, this is the baseline. Mm-hmm. How do you start converting that in the real world from the emotions you're feeling to release, be free, and move on?
Well, That's a good question. Because it's not, just knowing the three filters alone is great. I mean, it solves the problem of, I don't know where my anger is coming from. I don't know why I'm angry. I don't know why I keep getting angry. Now you know why, because your brain is telling you to look at things through these three filters. It's trained you to look at them through these three filters. But now the $64 million question is, what do I do with that information? And the answer is, you have to start questioning and determining whether what your brain is telling you is true or not. Is the way your brain is filtering the world and telling you to look at it true? And a lot of times, if you start doing that, you'll find that one or more of those three filters isn't completely true. It may be missing critical information that you lack. It may be distorting the way you're looking at things. It could be completely wrong about something. And a lot of times, we've all had the experience of being angry and then finding out later on we were wrong about whatever we believed that made us angry. All right, so we all know that happens, but it happens more often than you think. And what I discovered when I discovered these three filters 40 years ago and realized where my anger was finally coming from, and then started to do this, okay, now I'm going to start investigating each time I get angry. Is my brain telling me the truth or not? Or where is it lying to me? Or giving me a false view of reality? When you start digging in and asking those questions, and now you know what to ask and what to interrogate, you find out, oh my gosh, my brain tricked me. It made me think something was true, and it turns out the more I think about it and the more I look at it more broadly, it isn't really true the way my brain wants me to believe it's true. And then as soon as you do that, as soon as you see that your brain has tricked you and you realize how it's tricked you, the anger just dissolves in the moment, in that instant. I mean, you don't have to punch a punching bag. You don't have to run 5 miles. You don't have to take deep breaths. You just see the world more accurately as opposed to how your brain told you to see it. And the emotion goes away. And the more you practice that, the faster you get at it, the better you get at it. And also you start to rewire your brain and you start to see things eventually, you start to see things more accurately. And your brain can't fool you as much as it did before you woke up to this whole process and started doing the work of challenging what your brain is telling you. And that's literally how you can get free of anger. Now, it doesn't happen like right off the bat. It doesn't happen immediately. You got to actually do the work of testing this out, seeing where it's true, seeing where your brain is tricking you, figuring out the patterns and how it does it. And then you can, which is not that hard to do once you know what to do. And then you build on that base, and eventually over time you get to a place, for me anyway, I went from being an extremely angry guy and being triggered by minor things frequently to where I hardly get triggered at all. And the same things that used to trigger me don't trigger me anymore because now I see them differently.
So if I'm hearing, go ahead, sorry.
And I see the world differently, but you have to do that work of challenging your brain and taking your brain on and seeing where it's misleading you and where it's not, which is not a normal thing for people to do. You don't go around usually, questioning your brain, but actually your brain is deceiving you a lot of the times. We know this, there's like 200 cognitive biases that psychologists have identified that are all ways our brains trick us into believing things that aren't really true. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of ways that every day our brain is misleading us.
So if if I'm hearing you correctly, let's just put getting angry in traffic, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have that problem. So if someone really wants to get better and not have this outrageous anger, especially over stuff that doesn't matter, let's say they get cut off in traffic or somebody swerves or whatever it does to trigger them.
Yes.
You need to stop and say, okay, what am I actually angry about? And then kind of do a self-check evaluation of what are the facts.
You don't have to do any of that.
Okay.
I already gave you what you have to. All you have to do is say, I'm angry. Okay, therefore these three filters must have been activated in my brain. You don't have to wonder about it. You don't have to, theorize about it. My brain told me to see somebody did something bad and wrong, somebody was hurt and harmed, negatively impacted, and they were unilaterally responsible or to blame. That's why you got angry. Now the trick is, can I see that there's anything might be wrong about those three filters? Are there any weak spots or weaknesses or flaws in those filters? Did they leave stuff out? Did they mislead me? That's what there is to do. You don't have to wonder anymore about what's going on. Again, if you write those three filters down, you will always know with 100% certainty why you got angry.
Yes. And then once you're,
The challenge will be what's the truth between what your brain is telling you and what happens in the real world.
yes.
That's
And so if like the cutoff in traffic example, you might say,
yes.
okay, well, maybe they're having their worst day ever, or maybe they're, late for work. Or I mean, how would you process through practically of calming yourself down?
Okay. So you're driving down the road and somebody speeds up from behind you, goes across the double line, zips in front of you, startles you. You have to slam on your brakes, and now you're pissed at that person. Okay? They drove
Okay.
recklessly. They drove recklessly. They endangered you. If you had anybody in the car with you, they were endangered. You could have had an accident. It could have been all kinds of negative, implications. So you're driving down the road, that happens. Okay, so your brain tells you to look at it, and somebody did something bad and wrong they shouldn't have done. You were either negatively impacted or potentially negatively impacted. That's the second one. And who was responsible for that behavior? The person who zipped around, went over the double line, and abruptly cut in front of you. Okay? That's what your brain told you, which made you angry. And your anger happens in a knee-jerk, automatic fashion. You didn't think about it. It just appeared because your brain automatically told you to look at it that way. In a split second, it just said, look at it this way, believe this. Okay, I'm angry. Now, obviously in the moment it's going to be hard to do, but let's say a half an hour later you're back home and you can reflect on the situation. Eventually you can get faster at it, but in the beginning you won't. But you're removed from the situation, you're back home, and now you say, okay, let's look at those three things. Is it true that that person did something bad and wrong they shouldn't have done? Well, yes, they shouldn't have, they shouldn't have crossed the double line. That's a no-no, okay? That's an infraction. They shouldn't have abruptly cut in front of me because it scared me and it could have caused an accident. So let's say the first one is true, okay? The second one, I was negatively impacted. I was hurt and harmed, negatively impacted. Well, in the first place, you weren't. Okay, you didn't have an accident. You didn't have an injury. Yeah, maybe you were startled a little bit, but in the big scope of things, how much of a negative impact is that? So the second one's a little. You already see the second one's a little bit iffy. It's like, well, technically, I wasn't really harmed. Okay, and then if you look at the third one, that person was unilaterally responsible or to blame, what that usually means is I didn't have anything to do with it, okay? But what if you did? What if you were driving slowly? Or what if you were driving in a way that aggravated that person behind you so much so that they decided they didn't want to stay behind you anymore and they had to speed around you? A lot of times that's what happens. A lot of times we play a role in the other person's behavior, but our brain cuts that out. So when we're angry, we're not focused on that. We're only focused on what they did. We're not focused on what we might have done to have provoked what they did. So I remember when I first started doing this stuff back 40 years ago, I used to get furious with people in my car when when they would cut me off or do something I thought was wrong about their driving skills. And I would honk the horn and make the gestures and do all this stuff. And then I started working on this stuff. And one day I was driving down the road on a highway and somebody came in on an entrance ramp very slowly. And I thought negligently, and I had to slam on my brakes, and I started working up the anger and I was really getting into it. And then all of a sudden I realized, ooh, wait a second. I was going 80 miles an hour in the right-hand lane. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I've been in that same situation on the other side where I've come onto a highway and I took a quick glance, because that's all the time you have, and I saw a car, but I didn't realize how fast it was going. So I just slowly meandered into the highway, and I didn't realize they were on top of me honking their horn. So I realized I wasn't being a bad driver or an inconsiderate driver. I just didn't appreciate how fast that person was going in a split second I had to look at them. And then now I was in that same situation, and I was the one who was the fast driver. So once you start to see the truth of and I couldn't continue to be angry. I couldn't work up the anger because I saw one of those three filters was complete BS, right? That they weren't 100% responsible, that I played as much a role as they did. And as soon as you see that, you can't see them as the bad guy anymore, and you can't see them as unilaterally to blame, and then your anger just dissipates. So there's all kinds of situations in life where we have these filters that happen automatically and immediately, and they're frequently flawed, and nobody has encouraged us to start asking these questions, and to start taking our brain on and saying, are you telling me the truth or are you not? And if you do that, you'll find a lot of times our brain is hoodwinking us, and we haven't woken up to it yet.
Yeah, so that makes sense completely for everyday scenarios. And what's funny is I picked the traffic one because I know a lot of people struggle with that. And that's actually not one I typically have a problem with, right? But what about the situations, Dr. Moore, where people have harmed you? Like,
Yeah.
husbands and wives, they have a good relationship, quote unquote, good relationship, and then one gets involved in something terrible and they go
Yep.
way too far
Yep.
and they cause a problem. Or you can have a work relationship where, you're at work and you have a boss that for terrible reasons promotes someone who's not a good employee, and you've been killing yourself for 5 years and you're not promoted and they are. I mean, there's so many situations that are personal and to deep levels. Like the
Yes.
marriage one happens sadly every day.
Yes.
A husband cheats on a wife cheats on a husband, they lie about it. There's
Yes.
narcissistic gaslighting. There's people who really derail and cause the other one harm. And of course, there's no perfect person in marriage,
Yes.
but or holy person in marriage, but they really are the quote unquote victim. Then you have work situations where you truly have an environment that's hostile. And it doesn't matter what you do, someone's
Yes.
being promoted and you're being held back.
Yes.
So in those roles, how do you deal with the anger?
It's the same thing. You got to look at what the difference between what your brain is telling you and what's actually true. Okay? And these are horrible situations. None of them that you described is anything anybody would want to go through. But they're real. They happen. All right? There are people who behave that way. There are bosses that are terrible bosses. Okay? You're not going to rid the world of terrible bosses. You might be unlucky and encounter one. But if your brain is telling you that, it's giving you a philosophy like I shouldn't have to endure a bad boss, that's actually a false belief. Statistically speaking, there's a good chance you're going to encounter a bad boss. Now, that doesn't mean that it's good that you have that situation. It just means that the reality is, if your brain is telling you you shouldn't have a bad boss, it's lying to you. Because the reality is you might. And then you're going to have to deal with that as best you can. Maybe the solution is you leave and you get another job. Or maybe the solution is you figure out some way to communicate with the boss to change their behavior, fix their behavior, which I know is a long shot, okay? But it has been done in a few cases, all right? But the point is, the philosophy that your brain has given you that you shouldn't run into that situation or be in that situation is a false philosophy. It's just in the real world, some people are going to be in that situation. And it's unfortunate. It's not good when it happens. But to run around thinking that shouldn't have happened to you is kind of your brain tricking you. All right?
And that can go in the marriage case too. Like, I shouldn't have to deal with a divorce. I shouldn't have to deal with an affair. I shouldn't have to deal with being exploited. Whatever it is,
those are all things your brain is telling you. They're philosophies your brain is giving you that are not realistic. We know 50% of marriages fail. We know domestic violence happens frequently. And if you look at domestic violence, so someone who's violent, it works both ways. Someone who's violent is violent because of the three filters. They're looking at their partner, thinking the partner did something bad, wrong they shouldn't have done. They're thinking that they were negatively impacted in some way, okay? And that person was unilaterally responsible to blame, meaning they didn't have anything to do with it. Now, we know that that's probably false, that the person committing the domestic violence plays a huge role in what happened, okay? And they can't pretend to be innocent in it. So they're inflicting pain on the other person, but they're looking through the same three filters, and the filters are lying to them, and that gets them all worked up and in a rage, and then they take out their rage on the other person. It's because they bought into the lies that their brain was telling them. Now, why did their brain, give them these three ways of looking at things? Well, we don't know of all the influences on their lives, what their parents were like, what their different people in their lives that impacted them to make them that kind of person who's so distorted in their view of the world that they end up acting that way. Okay, so that's from the side of view of the offender. But if you're the person being offended against, if you're the person who domestic violence is being dished out to you, okay, and you're angry about it, okay, then you're looking through those three filters. The person who committed violence against you did something bad, wrong they shouldn't have done. Well, that's obviously true. They shouldn't have done that. You were negatively impacted. That's true, probably. You were negatively impacted, and usually physically impacted, and maybe worse. Okay. But when you get to the third one, that they were unilaterally responsible and you had nothing to do with it, in a marriage, that's almost never the case. Whether big conflicts or little conflicts in any marriage, it's never that one person is 100% responsible to blame and the other person zero. That doesn't happen. Everybody has shared responsibility in a marriage. Now, it could be 80-20, it could be 60-40, 50-50, who knows? All right, but you didn't not play a role. All right, if somebody's attacking you, believe me, there's something going on in the relationship that you may not be aware of, where you're in some way, I'm not saying intentionally, but in some way you're playing a role. Now, you may not be aware of that role, and some people may not want to admit that they're playing a role, but they are in reality. So both brains are tricking the people involved in the situation, and they just have to figure out how their brains are doing that and try to deal with it and resolve it as best they can. Now, it may be the way is to get the hell out of the relationship, and the brain may be tricking, and the brain tricks a lot of people in that situation into staying in the relationship. Oh, he'll come around. That's all brain BS. He'll change. He really loves me. Well, no, he doesn't. If he's or she or whatever, if they're treating you that way, that's a clear sign that they've lost touch with what love is. All right. So for you to think that they're going to become a loving individual is your brain fooling you. So you've got to understand how your brain is tricking you in multiple ways. Anytime it makes you angry, it's probably tricking you, and anytime it's keeping you in a bad situation, it's probably tricking you. But that's what happens for human beings, and the brains that we have is they make us stay in situations that any normal person would walk out of as soon as they could, but our brains are giving us all kinds of reasons not to do that. So it gets us in a lot of different ways. One way is by causing emotions that aren't necessary or harmful to us, and other ways is keeping us from being able to resolve those situations so we don't have the emotions that keep coming up over and over again, or the hurt and harm coming up over and over again.
Yeah, and I thought when you were just talking, I thought about the Bible, Samson and Delilah. I remember reading that story and never understanding, like, why would Samson keep going back to this woman, right? And there's this one verse, it says, because he loved her. And he just loved her, so he kept going back, even though she was trying to cause him harm, and it was too late before he saw it.
Yeah.
And how many men and women are in that situation? So I want you to challenge me, or I'm going to challenge you, because I know a lot of people, sadly, where, again, there's no completely holy person, right? But I know, sadly, a lot of marriages over the last 48 years of my life that I've observed, and the husband or the wife was really a great human and they loved their spouse, and that spouse was just a scumbag. They, domestic abuse to the wife, they cheated on him, all sorts of bad things. So I can't say like that woman or that man really did anything to contribute to the problems.
You have to be careful about that because there's so many factors involved. Yes, they were a good person. That may be true.
Or a kind person, but I'm just saying there's a lot of times people fake who they are.
In relationships, there's so many little things that we can do to irritate the other person that we're not even aware that we're doing.
I agree with that, but I mean, there's people who fake who they are. They get married and they abuse their wife. Like they just totally lie, or they totally lie to the husband who they are, and they get married and then they abuse the husband. I mean, so what I'm saying is when you're in that situation, I I agree with everything you've said in the sense of how to process it and deal with it, and how they stay in that marriage because they're waiting for the miracle, or the person really loves me. And like you said, they don't. They love themselves more. I agree with everything you're saying, but I really have seen so many
Yeah. It's
marriages where they really do have one
yeah.
just jackass spouse and the other one's just the constant beating post.
Well, I'll tell you, it's such a common pattern. Of course, everybody's seen it. It's such a common pattern that I've given it the name. I've given it the name the 007, the 007 syndrome.
007 syndrome. Okay,
Yeah.
explain that. Yeah.
So the 007 syndrome is you got two fairly decent people, okay, and they get married, right? And as soon as they get married, one or both of them decides that the marriage license is like a license to kill. And they really think that, okay, now we're married, so now we can really, now we can really go after each other. We can really, be nasty to each other. We can really criticize each other. We can talk down to each other. We can berate each other. We can even sometimes physically, pummel each other. It feels like that the marriage license is, their brain tells them that the marriage license is a license to kill. Not real, it's a license to be nasty in your relationship because you're married, and that's what married people are supposed to do, which is complete caca. All right, but our brains will tell us that, and then we'll act that way because we'll think we're doing what married people normally do, and it's complete BS. But that's what our brain is feeding us, and that's how we behave, and that's where that's where a lot of that behavior comes from. Is feeling like it's the normal thing to do in a marriage is to berate your partner, which just destroys the relationship. It literally kills the relationship if you keep doing that. And it keeps escalating because as soon as one person does it, the other one retaliates and it just gets, snowballs. And it's a bad situation. But it all came from your brain, somebody's brain telling them that this is how you should behave and how it's okay to behave in a marriage, where the truth is, if you're married, you should never want to do anything that's negative towards your partner. You should always want to be more uplifting and building your partner up rather than tearing them down. That's how you should behave in a marriage if you want to have a good one. But unfortunately, a lot of people today do the exact opposite, and they wonder why the person wants to leave at some point or the marriage fails at some point when they engage in that kind of crazy activity that their brain tells them to engage in.
Yeah. So now let's say, again, we'll just stick with this. There's so many scenarios, so many ways we could process this interview, but like we'll stick with the marriage one. You have a man or a woman, they go through a marriage and it ends in divorce,
Mm-hmm.
but they're stuck in the anger cycle. They're like, that shouldn't have happened to me. That person treated me bad. How do they get free from that?
Well, I tell you, I do a lot of work with people going through divorce. I've even trained a number of divorce coaches who came to me and said, I'd like to learn your technology for helping people deal with anger because it would be very useful to me because I'm dealing with anger all the time in the people that I'm working with and who I'm counseling. So there's a lot of anger, obviously, that goes on around divorce. And again, it's the same three filters are always involved, and it's the same process where the filters are probably false in some ways in both parties. And until they start recognizing that and dealing with it and telling the truth about what really went down and how it happened and what role they played and what role they didn't play, okay, then it's not going to get sorted out and the anger is going to persist. And you see a lot of people that have a lot of anger going, of course, the lawyers and judges stir it all up with their behavior. But once it's over,
Yeah, for
and
450
now,
bucks an hour.
yeah, that's right. Once
The
it's
only
over,
people who win from divorce are the attorneys and the Satan. So I hate divorce. I went through a divorce,
yeah,
but the only people who win from divorce are Satan and the attorneys.
yeah.
It's just a broken system.
Yeah, and then afterwards, when you're co-parenting, there's all that lingering anger that keeps coming up because they never address the root causes in the beginning, which is, okay, why did we get divorced? I'm angry at you, you're angry at me. Our anger is coming from our three filters. Where is our brain tricking us, each of us, into seeing things incorrectly? And if they could have both done that, which is not easy to do, but if they have professionals working with them that are assisting them in doing that, it can happen. But until we get more people who understand anger in this way and understand how to help people in this way, it's probably not going to happen that much. But it can. Theoretically, it's possible. And I've seen people who have come through divorce and they've let go of the anger. And they did it by telling the truth, as opposed to the way their brain would work up the anger and make them angry each time that would happen. It's the same process. It doesn't matter whether it's divorce. It doesn't matter what the situation is. It's always the same three filters. It's always our brain doing the same thing. And it's always our brain lying to us in one or more of those three ways, that is at the root cause of whatever's going on.
Yeah, so I guess I'm intrigued and a little unclear because, like, there's random murders. They're not common, but they're truly random murders. There's
Mm-hmm.
a guy and a woman, they're coming home for a show.
Yep.
They're walking down the road, they get robbed, the scumbag shoots them,
Yep.
and they're dead. And now you
Yep.
have the parents and the kids, and
Yep.
they're just angry.
Yep.
So
Well, they're angry. They're angry because the
somebody
person
did
who's
something bad and wrong.
wrong, which is
They were
true.
negatively impacted.
They were negative impact, which is true. If you're killed, you're negatively impacted.
Well, no, but the
Not,
kids are
not
negatively.
not
You
to
took
joke
my
about
dad.
it.
You took
Yeah,
my dad,
that's a
and
huge negative. That's a huge negative impact. Okay, and then but then the last one is the person who did that, the murderer, was unilaterally responsible or to blame. Well, guess what? They probably weren't.
see,
They
that's where I'm
probably
getting stuck, and I bet a bunch of
well.
our listeners are. So we
Yeah,
have thousands and thousands of people listening to this show each week from all
yeah.
around the world. Help
You
us
got to look at
understand
it.
this, because I know I
You got
don't understand that.
you got to look at it more broadly and more philosophically. That person is functioning very abnormally in society. Okay,
Yeah.
they had to have a lot of influences on them in the past that made them that way. They didn't just get born that way.
Oh,
Well,
I agree. There's
and they,
reason what they do, but in that moment, I'm not psychoanalyzing them.
no, but in reality though, and no, you're angry because you're holding them 100% responsible or to blame for what they did. They murdered your family member of yours. Okay?
Yes. They are responsible, though. They did it. They made the
They
choice.
did. They did. Yes and no. They did it. So in that sense, they're responsible. But what about all the factors that impinged on them that made them do it or led them to do it?
I can
Or
see
made
that.
it so that they didn't have the strength or the moral character or the strength to resist the temptation to do what they did. There's tremendous forces on them. I mean, I remember reading a book on forgiveness, and there are all these examples of people who have let go of anger by forgiving the perpetrator, by sort of realizing that, well, they just were in a state where they just behaved, crazily, and they probably had influences on them that made them do it. There was one of these countries in Africa. The example was a woman who was one of these countries in Africa where there was a civil war, and families, and neighbors were on different sides. And there was one neighbor that came into her house and killed her husband and her children, and she survived. And then the civil war ended, and she ended up not only forgiving the person who killed her family members, but she actually hired them to work for her. She had truly let go of the anger. She had seen that person who was the perpetrator as a victim of some forces in their life that she couldn't even understand or knew what they were, but she had to assume that there were some forces strong enough to make that person behave that way and turn on their neighbor like that in some crazy war scenario where they got somebody brainwashed them into thinking that was the right thing to do, and they went out and did it. So if you have to if you get broadly philosophical like that, you can forgive things, you can see things differently. The Dalai Lama is a great example of this. The Dalai Lama has tremendous compassion, way more than most of us can muster up, because he's practiced it. He's practiced looking at things that way and seeing things more broadly and letting go of a lot of the normal judgments that we would have on other people. And you can do that. And you have to see that when we're not doing that, our brain is telling us to hold on to those judgments. The brain is telling us to hold on to those philosophies, that this person, should be held guilty and responsible. And maybe in the law, that's the way it works out. And even if the law punishes somebody, you can still be angry at them for the rest of your life until you let go. And the only way you can let go is to tell the truth. And usually when you do that, you see that whatever was driving your anger in the first place was due to some bad philosophy or some flaw in one of those three filters that you bought into. But again, it's not normal for people to think that way. It takes a little bit of, again, being at a sort of higher philosophical state to be able to see things in that kind of a context, because everybody else is telling you, no, look at it, in the normal way, which is they're a bad person. They are just inherently a bad person. They did it. The three filters are true. You should be angry. You should get vengeance. You should get justice, whatever it is that we do when we believe the three filters are true.
Yeah, and I do believe forgive lest ye not be forgiven, and I believe that we need to love, but
But let me tell you, you can't, you're, again, our brain tricks us into thinking you can say the words, I forgive. And you
yeah,
can say,
oh,
I'm gonna forgive this person. But if you're still looking at it that they did something bad and wrong, they hurt and harmed one of your loved ones or you, and they're 100% responsible for blame, you ain't forgiven. You're not going to forgive them. In your heart, you're still going to be angry. It's only when you can see through those three filters and realize that one or more of them isn't true that you truly go, okay, now I can forgive because now I see it differently. If you don't see it differently, you haven't forgiven.
yeah, and same thing with saying you're sorry. People say the words, but they don't mean it. People can
Correct.
say they forgive, but they don't forgive. And I know
Right.
and it's a process. It's not instant, especially if someone's truly harmed you. It takes time.
But if you let's say you're in a marriage and you did something wrong or something like that, and you say I'm sorry, you can say I'm sorry, and your partner may go like, well, I don't know whether I can trust that or not. Okay, but if you say I'm sorry, and here's why I'm sorry, I realized that I thought this way, and that caused me to behave this way, and now I realize that the way I was thinking was completely wrong, and I misjudged you, or I blamed you for something that you didn't really do, and I realized my mistake, and now I want to make up for it. That's a whole different kind of apology, and you really would get it. You go, okay, this person really is. They see their fault. They see how they made a mistake, and it led to this problem, and now they're owning up to it. And that's a real apology that you can trust if it's couched that way.
Yeah,
And
you say what you
again,
did, and will you
yeah,
forgive me? 100%. That's a biblical model of a
yeah. But it
repentance.
means that person saw the situation better in a new way, where they realized something they hadn't realized before, that they had made a mistake, that they had misjudged somebody or made a false assumption or something like that, which is looking at it in a whole new way. And then they communicate that to you, and you realize, oh, they have seen it differently, the way I saw it,
Yeah.
more accurately. And then you realize that you can buy that apology. It's the same with forgiveness. Till you see the situation differently, it's only lip service if you say you're forgiving.
Yeah, and in today's day and age, we're becoming more and more lovers of selves, right? So you're
Hmm.
seeing less and less sincere apologies. So let's go with the model of you've been harmed greatly, and the other person doesn't give a shit. They just don't care. They don't see they did anything wrong. They're a narcissist, they're a sociopath. How do
And
you
then
recommend we deal with those types of injuries and harm?
well, again, you're going to there's a certain percentage of the people in the population who are going to be that way. They're not going to own up to their faults. They're not going to own up to their mistakes, and you're going to run into some of them, and it's going to be nasty when you do, and it's going to be very unsatisfying, and you're going to wish they were different. But guess what? It's like wishing tornadoes don't happen. They happen.
Yeah.
And when one happens and blows your house down, there's no point in being angry about it. Yeah, it's horrible. And yeah, you lost your house, you lost your possessions, there may have been loss of life. But to assume that that tornado shouldn't happen and should never happen to you, that's not realistic thinking.
I
It's
think
just,
that is a good distinction right there.
yeah,
It's not that it should have happened. It's not that it was
no,
right,
no.
but it
Or
happens.
that
It
it is
happened to
good that
you.
it happened. It's not that it's good that it happened. It's a statistical probability that it's going to happen to some people sometime, and that's just the way life is, and you can't get around it. You just have to realize, and at a certain level you have to accept that it happened to you and move on. You know.
Yeah, and I know biblically there's Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those that love God, to those
Yeah,
called according to his purpose.
yeah.
So whether we understand it or not, in our lifetime, we will understand in eternity. Everything will work out for good somehow.
Yeah.
But man, in those moments, like I got a buddy from college, his son's working, drunk driver, middle of the day, hits him while he's doing landscaping. The guy drives off the road and hits him. And my buddy's doing great, but it's just like that's something I could see being angry about. Or you have people who are, a kid, their dad and their mom was taken away because some psycho killed him. Like this Friday, right? That's so strange. I'm walking downtown after dinner, and this guy out of nowhere jumps in front of me and he puts both his hands down the front of his pants. And in a split second, I'm thinking, is he pulling a gun? Is he some psycho about to whip himself out? Or is this some retard because he was in his mid 20s and he's making some kind of social media video and he's got friends around him, right? Or is there other people about to jump me? So in a split second, I take a step to the right to go around him, and he steps over and says, "Don't move." There was no conscience, there was no anger. I just took my right hand, I threw him out of the way, grabbed the person I was with my left hand, and walked on. And you know what that psycho says? "Why did you push me?" Like that was his mentality.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
you just stood there and his hands are in his pants. I don't know what he's going to do.
Yeah.
And he tells me not to move. And his response isn't any form of accountability. It's
Right.
why did you push me?
Right. Right.
It,
It's the
it-
same thing. So he had his three filters going. Okay. He was not in the wrong. His brain filtered that out. His brain wouldn't let him see anything that he did that was wrong. All he could see was what you did that was wrong.
yeah, he's lucky I didn't punch him or throw him through a plate glass window.
Yeah, perfect example of how the three filters work. So he was pissed at you for what you did, which means he was looking for those three filters that you did something wrong, and he didn't have anything to do with it. And it was baloney. His brain would not allow him to see the reality of the situation, which was he played a big role in why you did what you did.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm baffled by it. I'm not angry at him, but I'm just saying this dude's got issues. Okay. So
Yeah,
maybe he was abused in his life. Maybe
yeah,
he didn't seem on drugs or alcohol,
yeah,
but he clearly had a broken mind. But
yeah,
I'd say the top two things that dude was going to do is either flash us or pull out a weapon.
yeah.
And I'm not going to psychoanalyze him. And if he pulled out a weapon once I moved my girl to safety, I
Yes.
would have knocked him out. Right? I wouldn't have
Yeah.
psychoanalyzed and said, "I feel bad that you were molested as a child and now
Yeah,
you're
so this
perfect."
whole thing of analyzing the situation, it's hard to do in the immediate moment when something's going on, okay?
Yeah.
When you get actually when you practice this over a long period of time, you get pretty good at questioning your brain like quickly.
Good.
Like I remember there was one example I give is when my daughter was young and sitting we were out at one evening and she was in the car seat in the back of our car and we had an incident where she did something and I started to well up with anger and I was going to just turn around and blast her, with parental anger, and I stopped myself. It's almost like, a golf, you see, in a golf tournament where a professional golfer, be in the middle of their backswing and somebody will make a sound or noise or something.
Yeah.
They'll just stop their swing. It's like that. I started to get angry and I just stopped it. Okay. Because I knew that it's likely my brain was tricking me. I didn't know what, I couldn't analyze it in the moment. I didn't have any exact knowledge of where it was tricking me. I just had a suspicion that it was probably tricking me, which caused me to be careful about blasting my daughter. So I decided to ask her why she said what she said and didn't expect an answer that would be reasonable, but she gave me one. And I was like so thankful that I didn't, because I saw that I completely misread the situation. Okay. I misinterpreted what she was doing. And that's what was driving my anger. But it was in the moment it happened so fast that you can't do the analytic thing. But I was able to like realize that I'm probably being fooled by my brain and stop and ask. And she told me, and I got a good answer, and that solved the whole problem. But so you can get fast in that sense. But most of the time, in the middle of the situation when anger flares up, you're not going to be able to do all the stuff we're talking about today. But when you're removed from the situation and you're thinking about it and you're like, oh, why did I get so angry? Or why did this person do what they did? Why did they get angry at me?
You can go
Now
back
you
and
have a
reflect.
model. Now you have a model for understanding what happened and for knowing what was at the source of it all. Which is
Yeah, that
really,
makes total sense. I mean, because like in the moment, I can say honestly, I did not consciously touch him or move him. I didn't even realize I did it until
Yeah.
he said, so I moved a grown man 6 feet that way. I moved my girlfriend 4 feet this way to bring her to
Yeah.
safety. And I didn't even realize I
And
touched him until he said, why did you push me?
and again, your brain filtered that out, even
Yeah.
though it was very real, right? Your
Yeah.
brain wouldn't let you see it until he gave you the feedback that it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I truly didn't recognize
Yeah.
I pushed
That's
him. But
that's
then my next thought
that's the
was,
whole thing that that's the whole thing we're talking about today is how easily our brain filters out real world events, what really happens, and doesn't allow us to see exactly what happened. It gives us a false image a lot of the times of what went on, and that's what we get our emotions are
yeah.
related to, or
And
based on.
as a doctor, I mean, I think it's safe to say universally, I don't care what culture you're from, I don't care what, even political agenda you have, the human mind is the least understood part of a human, correct?
Yeah, correct. It's very complex. So many things go on, and even I tell you, even brain researchers, even the best brain researchers don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, like you have the heart. Nobody really understands God's creation. There's
Yeah,
so many layers of millions of layers of complexity.
yeah.
But out of every single part of us, the brain is the least understood, right?
It is, well, it's pretty poorly understood. I mean, we've learned a lot, and all kinds of discoveries have been made, but it's like, it's like maybe we understand 10% of what's really going on, and then we still have more to discover and more to discover because it's so complex and it's so interconnected, and there's so many billions of nerve cells in our brains all doing things simultaneously and connected and intertwined and hormones running around and transmitters running around and all it's like almost impossible to figure out exactly what's going on, but we're getting bits and pieces of some of the processes, but we definitely know the filtering goes on all the time because again there's just mathematically there's too many data bits coming in to our senses for our brain to compute everything, so it's got to cut out some of that signal, so that it can, give us stuff to work with so we can make decisions and survive in life and be successful at what we want to accomplish. So we know the brain is doing that. It has to do it.
Yeah.
And it's just very complex in how it does what it does. And there's every day, there's not every day, but, every month or so, there's a new discoveries being made about how the brain does what it does, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah, and it affects so much of our lives. Like I know for me, I have no medical issues, nothing physiologically wrong with me, but I have to keep an eye on my blood pressure because when I get under stress and work under pressure, it's like you said at the beginning, it was self-inflicted pressure. Nobody else is
Yeah,
putting it on me.
right.
My blood pressure will go up. I
Yeah,
calm down, my blood pressure goes down. So it's all mental. It's all emotional. But the brain controls that. It's so
yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Now, before we transition to where Dr. Mort is today, where are you heading next? How can we help you now that you've helped us? And how people can get a hold of you? Is there anything between your birth and today, Dr. Mort, that we missed, or any other thoughts you want to share with
Yes, you
our
missed a
audience?
lot. You missed a lot.
Or is there something you
Unfortunately,
want to share or go through?
no, no, I'm just being facetious.
Yeah.
Uh, Obviously, there's so many things that happens in a person's life, that unless you're living it there with them every second, you're not going to be attuned to. But so yeah, there are a lot of things that have happened in my life. A lot of great things that have happened in my life. My wife and I just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary, for example,
Amen.
which
Congratulations.
which I guarantee you would not have happened had I not understood these three filters 40 years ago and was able to get rid of a lot of my anger before I met her. Because, like I said, all my relationships prior to that had failed miserably, and that was a big turning point for me, relationship-wise. So that was a big thing. And yeah, so I've had a lot of great things happen. I've had a lot of accomplishments, professionally and personally, that I'm very happy about. So yeah.
Awesome. So if someone wants to get a hold of you or learn more, where's the best place for them to visit?
Best place is to go to my website, which is docorman.com.
Okay.
And if they want to learn more about anger, I have a free handout called the Best Anger Elimination Method you can find, which is goes into more depth about what we've been talking about today. And you can get that at theangersolution.org.
Okay. And we'll put links in the show notes to all of these. That way
Okay.
our listeners can make sure they're getting the offers and the website right. So whether you're listening to us in a podcast player or Rumble, just check out the show notes, ladies and gentlemen.
Yep. And in terms of what things I'm going to be doing next, I've got 3 books coming out shortly on how to cure road rage.
Oh, that's funny. We were talking about that, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about the really big road rage. So it's similar 3 similar books, but one is targeted toward young drivers who are just getting started. One's targeted towards parents who are concerned about the effect of their road rage on their kids that they're transporting around with them all day long. And the third one is for professional drivers and commuters who are on the road many hours a day. So, but the same basic principles in each book, but it's kind of geared towards those 3 different audiences.
Awesome. Well, it has been an honor to spend some time with you today and learn and to challenge our brains and to take those 3 thoughts and to start applying them to our lives, right? Because knowledge without application means nothing. So we got to make sure we're applying what God's
And remember,
teaching.
you only need 6 words to write down 6 words to remember these 3 filters: bad, wrong, negative impact, unilateral blame. Those are the 3 filters that cause anger. And you now have, if you've been listening to this broadcast and you write down those 3 filters, anytime you get angry or anytime anybody around you gets angry, you pull out that card or that sticky note or whatever, you will now have X-ray vision into what's going on in their brain that's making them angry. And it'll be valid every time.
Awesome.
If they're angry.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us with this episode. Reach out to Dr. Mort, get that book, and ask him questions, check out his books, and visit the website. Stay in touch with him. Share this with your family and friends who you know it's kind of touchy if they have anger issues, right? It might make them more angry to send them an episode about anger. But if you send it with the right spirit and love, hopefully they'll accept it. And if you're like me, I'm definitely carrying around anger, and it's not that I want it. I just haven't figured out how to shake it free. So I'm going to keep praying to God, keep going to my Bible, and check out more of Dr. Mort's information. So thank you, sir, for being here today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. You did a great interview. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, we love you. Share this with your friends and family, not so we get even bigger and more famous, but so we can help people. You know, their podcast. Listen, do, repeat for life. Listen to what Dr. Mort said that's good. Repeat it each day in your life so you can have a great life in this world, but most importantly, in eternity to come. So I'm David Pasqualone. This was our remarkable guest, Dr. Mort Orman, and we will see you in the next episode. Ciao.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat for life. The Remarkable People Podcast.